what can you tell me about the NFL and competition committees deliberations that spat out a very, deeply detailed and confusing set of circumstances as to seeding and who plays who, what, and potentially where? What do you got for me on that, Tom?
Well, our NFL research colleagues sent out the permutations last night of the playoff seeding. It's like a 3-page color-coded thing that almost looks like one of those Magic Eye posters.
I'm holding him up right now, Tom.
But in terms of,
I'm holding him up right now. I printed him out.
In terms of these, the potential modifications, which owners started their meeting about 25 minutes ago, they're actively, engaging with it. It really came down to trying to create some form of equity in a very rare situation where you did not have every team play the same number of games. And Troy Vincent said it on a conference call the other day that they would lean on the guiding principles from COVID, where there was no game lost during COVID. They played every game over 2 years, but the plan was to go with what the policies and the bylaws say, which is if you have an uneven number of games and there's a cancellation, that you go off of winning percentage. So if it were strictly winning percentage, then this would be very cut and dried, which would be the Chiefs would be able to lock up the number 1 seed, home field advantage through the playoffs in a first-round bye by beating the Raiders on Saturday. They still can wrap up the number 1 seed and the bye, but the NFL and the competition committee tried to figure out a path forward where the Bills or the Bengals are not disadvantaged in terms of needing to go on the road for a potential AFC championship matchup. On top of that, then, you also have another unique situation where had the Bengals lost that game on Monday night that did not end up getting completed, then the Ravens could have won the division by beating the Bengals on Sunday. They would have swept them, so they would have the head-to-head tiebreaker. Now that opportunity doesn't exist, but in the NFL's telling, because the Ravens could have swept the Bengals and then not won the division with a chance to have the same record if the Bengals had played all their games, that then they would, in the event of a wild card playoff matchup, and only a wild card playoff matchup, decide home field advantage by a coin flip. So part of what the NFL and the competition committee were examining, from what I was told, was how important really is home field advantage. They know that it's important to the clubs. They know it's important to the fans. But if you go back over the past 4 postseasons, there have been 44 playoff games, not including the Super Bowls, which, of course, are always in a neutral site. Of those 44 games, 24 were won by the home team, 20 were won by the road team. Last year, both the Bengals and the Rams went on the road to win 1 or more games in order to get to the Super Bowl. The year before that, the Bucs won 3 road playoff games and ended up, of course, winning the Super Bowl, which, oddly enough, was in their home stadium. So it certainly is something that's important to a lot of people, but not important enough for them to completely upend the entire schedule. If there were a game, if that Bills-Bengals game had decided whether one of those teams or someone else was in or out of the playoffs, that would have been different, but it did not bear on that. The same teams would make the playoffs regardless. If they shifted everything back by a week in order to make up this Bills-Bengals game next week, now you're impacting all 14 teams that are in the playoffs. And the league wanted to make these decisions prior to Week 18, so everybody's on the same page. You're not making the decisions after you see what happens in the games. And to the extent that some teams, these things might factor into whether they play their starters or how they game plan, all those different things, you at least have that information going into the weekend. We also know the Bengals are not happy about this because there is no provision to do this in the league's bylaws. It's supposed to be, again, going back to the COVID guiding principles, it's supposed to be winning percentage. So the league and the competition committee trying to do the right thing here. It's not a surprise that not everybody is going to be thrilled with this setup. I sense that from the people I talked to last night and this morning, there's a lot of people who think in a really unusual and frankly unfortunate situation, even though it appears DeMar Hamlin is going to be okay, this is maybe the best of the kind of middling types of options relative to some of the other, draw names out of the hat type of things that have been suggested. So,
is it possible? Is it a what's the percentage of the vote from ownership, from membership? Is it just a simple majority? Is it possible that the commissioner and the competition committee came up with this and the owners reject it? Is that feasible, Tom?
Rules changes always require the supermajority, so you need 24 to to enact the rule, but this is also on a one-year basis. It's unclear, frankly, Rich. There's a lot of this that's unclear. Could you end up with a modification? Could somebody propose, a different version of it? Or if there's substantial pushback on certain elements of this, could that change? All of that is possible. There's also, there's some inconsistencies here, too, that I think have been pointed out. For instance, if the Bills and Bengals met in a divisional playoff game and they ended up with the same record based on this weekend's games, the Bengals would host that. It wouldn't be at a neutral site. The Bengals would host based on the strength of victory tiebreaker. The neutral site only applies to a potential championship game. And same thing with the Bengals and the Ravens. If the Ravens somehow this weekend end up in the 5 seed, and there are, again, in those lengthy scenarios sent by NFL Research, there are scenarios with that, they would play the AFC South winner. But if they were to win and somewhere down the line in a divisional game or a championship game, the Bengals and the Ravens ended up facing each other, there's no coin flip. That would only apply to the wild card round. So there's all these different things, and I think that as much as the Bengals, I think everyone would agree, did all the right things in terms of how they handled Monday night, you can certainly understand where a team is not going to be happy about a rule change that potentially, even though they have, by virtue of win percentage, already clinched the AFC North, they potentially then will play a harder schedule next year. They will have a lower draft pick, and they will not get to host a playoff game.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.